G engines or anybody because they think you're not going to do the right thing for the engine. That makes a bad name for the manufacturer, you see. So we coerced John Deere to give us 2 engines. Of course, we paid them for them. And then we bought the fuel tanks and we supplied the skill and the labor in the shop to do the whole thing, put it together.
Well, this question is for everybody on the committee here. You four helped establish a legacy of success that, quite frankly, puts a lot of pressure on me, but I appreciate it. But it's something that the entire Davis community and the campus can be proud of. I mean, what we've developed here is something that is, like Jim mentioned, it's probably something we can't replicate anywhere else, but it is an amazing story. Do you have any advice for student leaders or campus officials that we ought to be looking at over the next 40 years when we celebrate our 80th birthday? What are we going to look back on and understand was some sage advice from the folks sitting up here? Any ideas? Well, I can give some ideas about some things we're looking at right now, but if you have any advice in terms of development, in terms of planning for the future, we're looking at things like new double-deck buses. We're looking at things like, of course, we're committed to natural gas and other alternative fuels. But in terms of growth levels, anything like that?
Well, I think, I think the thing that really, being appealing to so many different elements of the population. I mean, Unitrans attracts attention and sympathy from about everywhere. And I thought through the list of people that made this thing work for me while I was here, and it ranges from congressional representatives to mayors to city council members like Bob Black, and other transit agencies look at this as a model. They look at it with a certain amount of admiration. They recognize it because it generates potential employees, particularly into the private sector on the management side. Vendors look at things that Wally and now his successor do, and that attracts attention. So just because of the name Unitrans and the look and feel of the buses, which Sam Seidel was here, he designed the look of the buses that we have today. The relationship with the city of Davis, the relationship with the campus, the relationship with the regional planning agency, the relationship with the Federal Transit Administration, it just all works. And whoever is at the center of making that work has got to continue to manage those relationships and make sure that the system stays engaged in as many facets of the community, of the region, of the state, in the national picture. So I think that's what's got to happen, is that this system needs to stay engaged and be an important part of the entire community's fabric. Thank you.
Well, I would say this sounds like Jim has some very excellent ideas. I do believe that Unitrans, perhaps inadvertently because we couldn't see this far ahead back in the 60s, but I think Unitrans has an important role to play in addressing, for example, the carbon footprint, addressing global warming, and addressing air pollution, addressing the economics of transportation for people that don't necessarily have the money to pay $4 and $5 and $6 a gallon gas prices just to get from point A to point B. And I would anticipate that those trends are going to make Unitrans an even more important feature of the Davis economy going forward. And so I would watch for opportunities to be very aggressive about, emphasizing that role for Unitrans. And actually, David urged me to bring up this point, so I'll bring up this point, or maybe it was Ann. I think we're reaching the point where we're so close to the tipping point on global warming that we've got to begin to think of much, much more radical solutions than solutions that have been proposed so far. And to me, one of those solutions would begin with a car-free day every week in Davis. And I think that students have a role to play in that, because I think if you had a large volunteer army of students essentially going door to door and saying, you know, every Wednesday in Davis is going to be car-free, and we're here to help you plan the ability to get from your home to your destinations, and we have your bus schedules, and we have your bike routes, and we have you know, we can answer your questions about emergency services or the need to get someplace on an emergency basis, and we're here, you know, and we're able to do that. But Unitrans itself, you know, I think has the potential to see an even more quickly expanding ridership, and to play a very important role in that, and to help continue to get people out of their cars in the future. So I would look very optimistically at the future of Unitrans.
I would also like to just build on what Bob said, and that is that clearly public transportation needs to play a much larger role in our whole society in the United States in the future. We have about 10 billion passenger trips by public transportation per year now in the U.S. Hopefully with a new president, whoever he or she may be, and next year, we can begin a program of we ought to be establishing very aggressive goals to double or triple the ridership in a fairly short period of time. I see Unitrans as a model of a system around which a whole curriculum could be built to produce and give students the opportunity to study to be transit managers of the future, who really are going to be very, very necessary. There are very few places in the United States where you can go to study public transportation. University of Pennsylvania has a good program. Indiana used to have one. And there are a few programs here and there. But to get a master's degree in transit management, and many of the subfields of transit operations, maintenance, Wally's inspiring stories about what can be done. I could see a whole curriculum built around Unitrans and the things that it does for this community as a way of sort of spreading the bacillus throughout the whole society. That's really what we need to do. We need to think big in this country about public transportation. And I could see some very aggressive things being done around Unitrans as kind of the nucleus of that. So it's all up to you.
Okay, no pressure. And it's up to everybody here too. That's part of the message, but I appreciate that. We're kind of running out of time here. We need to be out of the place by 8, so I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience. While Scott's getting the microphone, can I have a raise of hands from alumni, Unitrans alumni here? That's great. Okay. And how about current Unitrans employees? That's fantastic. So these are the leaders of tomorrow, guys. These are the guys who are going to make the difference, so thank you. Any questions? John? Yep. It should be on, I believe.
Tom, in 1989, when you were the director of RT, the general manager of RT, you did an analysis of having light rail come to Davis. And it would seem like that would be one of the things. I mean, light rail is a question in terms of Davis, but we don't really have, it's not like Isla Vista and UCD, and Santa Barbara. But the University of California defines local as within 30 miles because of Berkeley and UCLA. So it would seem like if we could connect to RT light rail, that would significantly cut down on people driving on the causeway.
A lower cost light rail connection between Sacramento, West Sacramento, and Davis is quite feasible. We did evaluate it. We found a low cost way to do it. It can be done. as usual, the problems are primarily institutional. Yolo County is not part of the RT district, and we don't have the institutions in our region to kind of make these things happen as quickly as they should. But from a purely technical basis, there's no reason why that couldn't happen, and there's no reason why the core distribution inside Davis of a light rail system, starting perhaps with a small streetcar nucleus, couldn't be developed and operated as a multidisciplinary Unitrans engineering, a planning, ecology department project into still another mode. Extending from Sacramento in the future, but it certainly could be done. There has been this idea that somehow we could run enough service on the Union Pacific tracks to provide the rail connection between Davis and Sacramento, but I think that's not likely to happen. The Union Pacific has its own priorities. Every additional train added to freight track is very, very difficult to achieve. And there's a lot of interest in moving freight back onto the rails for many of the same reasons that we want to have people ride trains instead of driving. So I think if you want to have frequent all-day service between Davis and the rest of the regional transit network in Sacramento, that probably a light rail system ought to be looked at again.
Any questions? Caroline?
So, wow, that was loud. When I was doing research and looking through things at the library, I found an article clipping about the first women drivers that we had, I believe in 1974. So I was just wondering why we didn't have women drivers sooner than that, and kind of, I guess, how that worked with getting them. And
I think Mike and some of the others were. I remember I believe the first woman driver was. Candace Spolina? I can't. But it was just the times. That was a time of change, and you started seeing. I mean, one of the reasons I went to work for Unitrans was that I was, an engineering school, and the social opportunities were just not there. There were starting to be women entering the engineering profession, but very small in numbers. It was primarily a male-dominated profession, and the same thing with a lot of professions, up to and including bus driving. And I think the 70s began to see that change, and I think Unitrans was probably in the forefront of that. Just very readily as women applied, they were accepted into the ranks, and just like it just happened naturally. But I think the answer to your question is that those were the times, and the times were changing in the early 70s, and Unitrans adopted that change seamlessly. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's sort of the reality.
My wife has a cousin named Paula Peterson, and she was the first female park ranger hired by the State Park Service. And of course, park rangers they're a law enforcement position. But the headline that greeted her hiring was "First Girl Ranger Hired by State Park Service." And this was, I think the year was 73, might have been 74. So it is, it's hard to, unless you live through it, and kind of the constant breaking of barriers that was occurring during that time period, it's hard to even understand, like, why wouldn't women be, statistically, why weren't half of the women drivers in the Unitrans system women from day one? But that just wasn't the way the world worked at that point in time. And it was the subject of struggle.
We have time for one more question before we've got two hands up. Let's see if we can squeeze them in, okay? Sure.
Yes, the two of you are from Marin and San Francisco, those who were talking about the 1960s. I was wondering if you could talk about BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit. which was pretty innovative, and was that the culture out of which we piggyback here at Davis, as our big brothers and sisters in the Bay Area did the real heavy lifting, voting to tax themselves big time in 1962 for the Bay Area Rapid Transit.
I'm going to let Tom answer that because I don't think BART ever came to Marin County, but
That's thanks to the Bridge District. Well, yes, I mean, BART was under construction at the time. BART, I think, most visibly ripping up Market Street for the construction of the BART tunnel was going on in 1967. So that was sort of uppermost. I mean, that was part of the environment in which we were acting. I don't think BART played a direct role in influencing Bob to write down his list of his platform. But it did. I think there are common threads there in that, you know, the idea that public transportation should be part of a public program of providing services, that it's a public responsibility and all of that. I do think all of that BART and Unitrans, which has been running longer than BART. In fact, Unitrans, being in operation now for 40 years, is the oldest operating transit entity in metropolitan Sacramento, and it's older than BART in terms of its operation. Muni and AC Transit are older, but it's older than the Santa Clara system, so it's really established.
One more question, David, do you want to?
Could we, I think,
I did want.
I'd like to add something to that.
Sure.
Okay, I'll just be brief. But I think actually raising the issue of BART is very important, and looking at Unitrans is very important through the prism of, you know, what is the great debate that we experience in our political life in America. And the great debate is between, in my opinion, it's a personal opinion, between unbridled capitalism and people who believe that the people banding together accomplish through the public sector the improvement of our quality of life, and that is a tremendous social good. And, you know, BART and Unitrans, these are examples of what the people can accomplish by working together in cooperation to achieve widespread public benefit. And the pendulum moves back and forth between these concepts. I think the 60s were the 60s partly because of John Kennedy and, you know, the ideal of public service that he held out, and students, people who were young and idealistic at that time, saw, you know, public service as a high ideal, a high achievement, even if they didn't make a lot of money. I think that, you know, you look at the history of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, including the Clinton years, and certainly the early part of, certainly these 7 years so far of the Bush administration. And what you're really looking at is the extreme swing of the pendulum in the other direction. And I think we're about to swing back. I mean, that's how it feels to me. And I see that door in the wall that retards progress opening. And I think that we're going to be able to move through that door and really accomplish a lot in the next decade. That's my hope. And I think there's evidence that that's happening.
I wanted to draw a parallel between Bob's work to move a transit system into fruition here, and the question about BART and the willingness of a set of communities to band together in a region and set up a taxing situation to make the jump and bring to, you know, a BART on board. Well, through the work of Bob and students that I've seen pass through the system and work with us on the political side, the same thing has occurred, where the students as an entity, when they're galvanized by a student leader that creates a vision, step to the table and say, yes, we want to pay a little bit more and have something a little better, something that works well. And that happened several times through my career, and subsequent to Bob's being here. And for example, in the late in the late 80s, we went through a period where we were rethinking our financing, and we got together, we called it UFTUF, the Unitrans Funding Task Force, and Mark sat on that, and I provided staff, and we had representatives from the students and from the campus and from the city, and two students, Jeff Honor and Vinny Singh, participated in that committee. They were student leaders at the time, elected to the student leadership, and they got together and stood in front of the committee and said, what if we put in front of the students a proposal for what they called at the time free access? Really, it was unlimited access for students. And they galvanized the campus population, and Mark and I remember, and some of the campus leadership were just floored when they voted to enact that fee, and literally overnight we more than doubled our ridership, and we haven't looked back. Just astounding, just unbelievable growth. So, you know, I think the model in Davis in some ways is similar to the counties in the Bay Area that banded together and created a BART visionary kind of scenario.
I'll echo that. As a driver in the 80s, we didn't have unlimited access, but if you were a driver, you got free access on the bus. So that was another reason to drive a bus. Listen, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to shut down the questions right now. We'll have about 10 minutes to talk as groups, and we can go over and enjoy some refreshments.